and herring hauled from cold, nutrient-rich waters that rank among the most productive fishing grounds anywhere on the planet. Lighthouses left behind from an earlier era of Japanese administration still stand along some of the island's cliffs, weathered relics of a complicated shared history between two nations, whose borders here have shifted more than once across the last century. And finally, at the very end of the great Trans-Siberian line, the journey arrives at Vladivostok, a city perched dramatically across steep hills overlooking the Pacific Ocean, its bridges and harbor often compared, with only a little exaggeration, to San Francisco. As the primary home of Russia's Pacific Fleet and the country's main gateway to Asia, Vladivostok stands as a fitting final chapter, a city where European Russia and the Pacific world meet after a journey spanning nearly the width of an entire continent. Taken all together, what emerges from this land is not the empty, frozen wasteland so many people still imagine when they hear its name. It is a region defined instead by staggering scale and staggering contrast. Deserts hidden inside forests, deep Buddhist tradition thriving beside Soviet monuments, volcanoes steaming beside glaciers. A lake so old it has produced its own unique forms of life found nowhere else on the planet. Cities of wood and lace standing beside towers of glass and steel. Nomadic herders following reindeer across tundra that has barely changed in 1,000 years, even as oil rigs in modern cities rise not far away. Somewhere within all of this, too, lies the quieter matter of the people themselves. More than 40 distinct indigenous groups call Siberia home, from the reindeer-herding Nenets and Evenki of the north to the Buryat and Tuvan peoples of the south, each carrying its own language, its own beliefs, and its own delicate, evolving relationship with a landscape that offers both extraordinary bounty and extraordinary risk. Their stories rarely make it into the shorthand version of Siberia most of the world carries around, yet they are, in many ways, the truest measure of the region, proof that human beings can not only endure such an environment, but build meaning, culture, and even joy within it. Siberia endures in the world's imagination as a symbol of hardship, and it would be dishonest to pretend that history has not been harsh here, from imperial exile to Soviet labor camps to the punishing climate itself. But hardship has never been the whole story. It has only ever been one layer of a much deeper, much richer whole. Beneath the myth of emptiness lies one of the most biologically rich, geologically dramatic, and culturally diverse regions anywhere on the surface of the Earth. A place where humanity has not simply survived the extremes, but has built entire worlds of tradition, belief, and beauty around them. Even the sky above Siberia has its own wonders to offer, since much of the region sits far enough north to fall within reach of the aurora borealis. On clear winter nights, curtains of green and violet light ripple silently overhead across the tundra and taiga alike, a natural spectacle that has inspired legend and quiet awe among the people who live beneath it for as long as anyone can remember. To travel through Siberia, even from the comfort of a screen, is to be reminded of just how large this planet truly is, and how much of it still remains far outside the reach of everyday familiarity. It is a place that rewards patience and curiosity far more than haste, revealing its wonders slowly, mile after frozen or sun-baked mile, to anyone willing to look past the old stereotypes and see what is actually there. 11 time zones, one continent's worth of contrasts, and a silence broken only by cracking ice, distant reindeer bells, or the low rumble of a train carrying travelers ever further east, toward a horizon that never quite seems to end. Not the frozen edge of the world, but one of its living, breathing centers, vast enough to hold deserts and volcanoes and ancient lakes within the same borders, wild enough to remind us that there are still places on this earth big enough and strange enough to outlast every attempt to fully explain them. Winter temperatures in towns like Oymyakon and Verkhoyansk can plunge below minus 60 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze breath midair into a fine glittering mist, cold enough that metal becomes brittle and exposed skin can suffer frostbite within minutes. And yet people live here, have always lived here, raising reindeer, fishing through the ice, and adapting to conditions that would be lethal almost anywhere else on Earth. Remarkably, Verkhoyansk also holds the record for the greatest temperature range ever recorded at a single location, with summer temperatures soaring above 30 degrees Celsius, a swing of nearly 100 degrees across the seasons. Running through this frozen region is a road that has earned one of the most haunting nicknames in the world, the Road of Bones. Built during the Soviet era, largely by forced labor, the highway stretches for nearly 2,000 kilometers through some of the most remote and unforgiving terrain on the planet. Its name is a grim tribute to the countless workers who lost their lives during its construction, many of them buried, according to local memory, beneath the very roadbed travelers still drive across today. It stands now as one of the most sobering reminders that Siberia's beauty and its history are deeply, inseparably intertwined. The people who call Yakutia home, the Saka, have built an entire culture around resilience to cold that would seem impossible almost anywhere else. Their traditional dress, layered from fur and hide, their diet built around raw frozen fish and horse meat, and their horses themselves, a hardy native breed with thick coats that allow them to survive outdoors even through the harshest months, all speak to centuries of careful adaptation to one of the most extreme climates on Earth. Modern Yakutsk, the regional capital and one of the largest cities ever built on continuous permafrost, stands as a strange marvel of engineering in its own right, its buildings raised on stilts to prevent the heat of daily life from melting the frozen ground beneath them and causing the entire structure to sink. Not far from these frozen extremes lies one of Siberia's strangest surprises, the Kara Sands, a genuine desert of golden dunes rising unexpectedly out of the middle of dense taiga forest and surrounding mountains. Formed by a rare combination of wind patterns and ancient geological conditions, the dunes stretch for several kilometers, an almost dreamlike contradiction sitting in one of the coldest regions on the planet, sand where by all logic there should only be snow and pine. Moving further north still, toward the edge of the Arctic Ocean, the land flattens into the Yamal Peninsula, a place whose name translates roughly to the end of the earth in the language of the indigenous Nenets people. Here, nomadic reindeer herders continue a way of life that has remained largely unchanged for centuries, migrating across the tundra with vast herds, living in reindeer skin tents called chums, and navigating a landscape where the sun disappears entirely for weeks during the depths of winter and never sets at all during the height of summer. Nearby, the city of Khanty-Mansisk sits at the heart of Russia's oil and gas industry, an unexpected pocket of modern wealth and architecture rising out of the surrounding wetlands and forest, home also to the indigenous Khanty and Mansi peoples, whose traditions predate the discovery of the oil beneath their land by many centuries. Continuing east along the Arctic coastline, the landscape grows ever more remote until it reaches Chukotka, the easternmost region of Siberia, and in fact, of the entire Asian continent. This is a land of tundra, volcanic hills, and coastline so far east that from certain points it becomes possible, on a clear day, to see the coast of Alaska across the narrow Bering Strait. The town of Pevek holds the distinction of being the northernmost town in all of Russia. A small, hardy settlement that endures months of polar night every winter, its residents adapted to a rhythm of life dictated entirely by the extremes of Arctic geography. South along the Pacific coast, the landscape erupts, quite literally, into the Kamchatka Peninsula, one of the most volcanically active regions on the entire planet. More than 160 volcanoes rise across Kamchatka, around 30 of them still active today, their peaks often wreathed in steam and smoke against a backdrop of glaciers and dense green forest. This striking combination of fire and ice has earned Kamchatka a reputation as one of the most dramatic landscapes anywhere on Earth. Hidden within its interior lies the Valley of Geysers, one of only a handful of major geyser fields left in the world, where boiling water and steam erupt rhythmically from the ground amid hot springs, mineral-stained rock, and rare wildlife found almost nowhere else, including some of the largest brown bear populations on the planet, drawn each year to the region's rivers during the salmon runs. Kamchatka's coastline adds yet another layer to this already dramatic scene. Orcas and humpback whales pass along its shores during migration seasons, sea otters drift lazily in kelp beds near the rocky coastline, and enormous colonies of seabirds nest along cliffs that plunge straight into the cold Pacific waters below. The peninsula remains so remote that even now it is reachable mainly by air, with no road connecting it to the rest of the Russian mainland, a fact that has helped preserve its wilderness in a state few other volcanic regions on Earth can match. Off the coast, the Kuril Islands stretch in a long volcanic chain between Kamchatka and Japan, a remote and disputed archipelago battered by Pacific storms and shaped by the same restless tectonic forces that built Kamchatka itself. Further south lies Sakhalin, the largest island in Russia, a place of dense forest, coal mining history, and a unique blend of Russian, Japanese, and indigenous Ainu and Nivk cultural influences shaped by decades of shifting borders and competing claims across the 20th century. Along Sakhalin's coastline and out across the Sea of Okhotsk, fishing remains a way of life much as it has for generations, with crab, salmon. The Yenisei begins in the mountains of Mongolia and travels north for more than 5,000 kilometers before emptying into the Arctic Ocean, cutting the entire region roughly in half as it goes. Just outside Krasnoyarsk stands one of Siberia's strangest and most beloved natural landmarks, the Stolby Nature Reserve, named for the towering columns of syenite rock that jut out of the forested hills like ancient stone sentinels. Climbers and hikers have been drawn to these pillars for more than a century, some of them worn smooth by generations of local climbers who have given each formation its own nickname and its own legend. Life along the Yenisei has always revolved around the rhythm of the river itself. Fishing villages line its banks for hundreds of kilometers. Hydroelectric dams harness its enormous flow to power much of central Siberia. And in the short summer months, riverboats carry passengers and cargo through stretches of the country reachable by almost no other means. The river freezes solid for much of the year, and when the spring thaw finally arrives, it does so with a violence that locals watch with a mixture of awe and caution as massive plates of ice grind and shatter against one another before finally breaking free downstream. Traveling south from Krasnoyarsk, the landscape begins to change again, rising into the territory of Khakassia and Tuva, regions where the steppe meets the mountains and where history runs impossibly deep. This land is scattered with ancient burial mounds, ceremonial stone markers, and standing stones that predate written history in the region by thousands of years. Locals call parts of this area the Valley of the Kings, a nod to the scores of Bronze Age and Iron Age tombs hidden beneath the grassy hills. Tuva itself carries a culture unlike anywhere else in Siberia, home to the haunting, resonant art of throat singing, a vocal technique so unusual that it can seem to produce 2 or 3 notes at once from a single human voice. Shamanic traditions remain alive here too, not as museum relics, but as living, breathing practices passed down through generations, tied closely to the land, the mountains, and the spirits believed to inhabit them. Archaeologists have long treated this borderland between Khakassia, Tuva, and the Altai as a treasure trove, since the region's dry, cold soil has an extraordinary ability to preserve organic material for thousands of years. Frozen burial mounds known as kurgans have yielded tattooed mummies, intricately woven textiles, and finely worked gold ornaments belonging to ancient nomadic peoples who once ruled these steppes on horseback, their way of life echoing forward through time into the Mongol empires that would later sweep across the continent. Every valley here seems to hold another fragment of that deep, layered history, half buried and waiting. West of Tuva rise the Altai Mountains, a name that, in the local Turkic languages, simply means golden mountains, and once you see them at sunset, it becomes obvious why. Snow-capped peaks push up past 4,000 meters, some approaching heights that rival much better-known ranges elsewhere in the world. Rivers here run an almost unnatural shade of turquoise, fed by glacial melt as they twist through steep valleys. The Katun River is perhaps the most famous of these, and following its course along the road known as the Choisky Tract, has been named among the most scenic drives on the entire planet. The route eventually leads travelers toward the Chulishman Valley, a remote canyon protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, where waterfalls tumble down sheer cliff faces and small villages still live largely disconnected from the modern world. In parts of the Altai, the earth itself turns a deep rust red, giving rise to landscapes locals half-jokingly call the Martian Hills, a place so alien in appearance that photographs of it are often mistaken for images from another planet entirely. But if there is one place in Siberia that towers above all others in both size and legend, it is Lake Baikal, and no honest account of this region can move forward without giving it the attention it demands. Baikal is, by every meaningful measure, one of the most extraordinary bodies of water on the planet. It is the deepest lake in the world, plunging more than 1,600 meters at its lowest point, deep enough to swallow most skyscrapers whole with room to spare. It is also the oldest lake on Earth, formed by tectonic movement more than 25 million years ago, long before most other lakes had even begun to exist. And astonishingly, it holds close to 20% of all the unfrozen fresh water on the surface of the entire planet, more than all 5 of North America's Great Lakes combined. The scale alone would make Baikal remarkable, but what truly sets it apart is what lives inside it. Because the lake has existed in isolation for so many millions of years, it has become its own evolutionary laboratory, home to more than 1,700 species of plants and animals, and roughly 2/3 of them exist nowhere else on Earth. Among the strangest of these is the Baikal seal, the only entirely freshwater seal species in the world, somehow finding its way into this landlocked body of water and thriving there ever since, hundreds of kilometers from any ocean. During the brief but intense Siberian summer, Baikal reveals an entirely different personality. Its waters, so cold they rarely rise above the mid-teens, even in the warmest months, take on a startling clarity, allowing visibility that can extend more than 40 meters below the surface in certain areas, a transparency rivaled by very few lakes anywhere in the world. Sailboats and small fishing vessels dot the shoreline, and hardy travelers still dive in for a brief, bracing swim, emerging with a jolt of cold that locals half-jokingly claim adds years to your life. Along the shorelines, forested hills rise steeply from the water's edge, dotted with small fishing villages that have changed little in generations, their wooden docks and smokehouses filled with the scent of omel, a small, oily fish found only in Baikal and considered by many to be the finest delicacy the lake has to offer. In winter, Baikal transforms into something that feels almost otherworldly. The surface freezes into ice so clear and so thick that it becomes possible to see straight down through it, sometimes for many meters, watching bubbles of trapped methane frozen mid-rise like strings of pearls suspended in glass. Cracks split across the surface in long, jagged lines, some stretching for kilometers, groaning and echoing with sounds like distant thunder as the ice shifts and settles. Visitors walk, skate, and even drive across the frozen lake during these months, standing atop a mile of clear water with nothing beneath their feet but stillness and depth. At the western edge of the lake sits Irkutsk, often called the Paris of Siberia, thanks to the elegant, well-preserved architecture left behind from its days as a wealthy trading post along old fir and tea routes. Grand stone buildings sit beside intricately carved wooden houses in the old quarter, a blend of European elegance and Siberian craftsmanship that makes the city feel entirely unlike anywhere else in the region. Irkutsk also serves as the main gateway to Olkhon Island, the largest island on Baikal, and considered by many Buryat people to be one of the most spiritually significant places in all of Siberia. Ancient legends describe it as home to powerful shamanic spirits, and its rocky cliffs, sandy beaches, and windswept steppe give it an atmosphere unlike any other island on the planet. Across the water from Irkutsk lies Buryatia, home to the largest indigenous Buddhist population in Russia. Its capital, Ulan-Ude, greets visitors with an enormous bronze head of Lenin, the largest sculpture of its kind in the world, standing in stark and almost surreal contrast to the golden roofs and prayer wheels of the nearby Ivolginsky Datsun Monastery, one of the most important centers of Buddhist worship in the country. Monks trained here have traveled to Tibet and back, keeping alive a tradition that has persisted through revolutions, wars, and decades of political suppression. Wildlife across the Altai and Sayan ranges adds another dimension entirely to the scenery. Snow leopards, among the rarest and most elusive big cats on Earth, still stalk the high, rocky slopes, rarely seen but carefully tracked by conservationists working to protect one of their last strongholds. Golden eagles, trained for centuries by nomadic hunters across Central Asia, still soar above these same ridgelines, and herds of wild Argali sheep, the largest wild sheep species in the world, pick their way along cliffs that would challenge even the most experienced human climber. Heading north from these southern regions, the landscape becomes wilder and far less traveled. The Putorana Plateau rises out of central Siberia like a lost world, a vast tableland of dark volcanic rock cut through by hundreds of deep canyons and waterfalls, some of them among the tallest in Russia. Almost entirely uninhabited and largely inaccessible by road, Putorana remains one of the least visited, yet most visually staggering landscapes on the continent, protected as a UNESCO site and reachable mainly by helicopter or long river journeys during the brief window of summer when the ice finally releases its grip. Further east lies Yakutia, officially the Sakha Republic, and here the story of Siberia turns from remote to almost unimaginable. Yakutia is the coldest inhabited region on the entire planet. There is a place on Earth so vast that 11 time zones pass through it before it ends. A place where rivers freeze solid enough to drive a truck across them, where forests stretch further than the eye can travel in a lifetime, and where an ocean of fresh water older than the mountains around it hides secrets no one has fully explained. This is Siberia, and what you're about to see will change everything you thought you knew about it. Most people who have never set foot here imagine one thing when they hear the name: snow. Endless, punishing, empty snow. A land of exile and silence stretched out at the edge of the map like an afterthought. But that image, the one carried through history books and old films, was never the whole truth. It was only ever the surface. Beneath it lies a world of turquoise rivers cutting through golden valleys, of mountains older than memory, of cities that have grown wealthy and cultured in the middle of what the rest of the world still calls the wilderness. Siberia is not empty. It is simply enormous, and enormity has a way of hiding what it holds. To understand the scale of this place, you have to let go of ordinary comparisons. Siberia alone covers more territory than the entire United States and India combined, and yet it holds a population smaller than that of a single major metropolis elsewhere in the world. It spans from the Ural Mountains in the west, the traditional line where Europe gives way to Asia, all the way to the Pacific coastline in the east, where Russia stares across cold water toward Japan and Alaska. In between lies almost every kind of landscape the planet has to offer. Endless coniferous forest known as taiga, the largest forest biome on Earth. Grassy steppe that rolls on for hundreds of kilometers without a single tree. Frozen tundra where the ground never fully thaws. Volcanic peninsulas still steaming with geothermal heat. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a lake so deep that scientists are still mapping its floor. The journey usually begins the way so many great Russian journeys do, along the spine of the Trans-Siberian Railway. It is the longest continuous rail line on the planet, stretching nearly 9,300 kilometers from Moscow to Vladivostok on the Pacific coast. To ride it from end to end takes about a week, and during that week, the window beside your seat becomes something like a slow-moving film reel of an entire continent. Birch forests give way to open fields. Fields give way to industrial towns. Industrial towns give way again to nothing but trees and sky. Somewhere past the Ural Mountains, without any dramatic announcement, you cross from Europe into Asia, and the character of the land begins to shift beneath you. Before the first city even appears on the horizon, there is the taiga itself, and it deserves a moment of its own. This single forest belt makes up roughly a quarter of all the trees on the entire planet, an unbroken sweep of pine, spruce, fir, and larch that rolls on for thousands upon thousands of kilometers without ever truly stopping. Wolves move through it in loose, wandering packs. Brown bears fatten themselves through short, intense summers before disappearing into long winter dens. Elusive Siberian tigers still prowl its far eastern edges, one of the rarest and most powerful predators left on the planet, clinging to survival in a landscape that somehow remains wild enough to sustain them. Flying over the taiga, or watching it scroll past a train window hour after hour, gives a traveler a strange, humbling sense of just how much untouched wilderness still exists on this planet, even in an age when so much of the Earth has already been mapped, measured, and tamed. The first great city travelers encounter deep in Siberian territory is Novosibirsk, the unofficial capital of the region, and, remarkably, one of the youngest major cities in Russia, founded only in the late 19th century around the construction of a railway bridge over the Ob River. Today it pulses with a kind of energy that surprises visitors expecting a frontier outpost. Opera houses, universities, research institutes, and a skyline that keeps climbing higher each year. It is proof, right at the outset of the journey, that Siberia is not a museum of the past, but a living, growing part of the modern world. Not far away sits Tomsk, a city that feels like it was built by architects who fell in love with wood. Elaborate wooden houses, carved with lace-like detail around their windows and eaves, line entire streets in a style found almost nowhere else on the planet. Tomsk carries a university tradition stretching back generations, and walking its old quarters feels like flipping through a picture book of Siberian craftsmanship, each building more intricately decorated than the last. Further along, the city of Krasnoyarsk rises on the banks of the Yenisei River, one of the great waterways of Siberia and one of the largest rivers in the world by volume.